Okay, so the objective for today is take a closer look at the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. We have a test coming up soon. Definitely study. But this is also a review do now question. Why did John Adams pass the Alien Act? Okay, so with the election of 1800, there were two political parties. The Republicans, which are not the same Republicans as today, but it was Jefferson and Aaron Burr. And then the Federalists were John Adams and Pinckney. So Jefferson and Burr received the same amount of votes. So at this time, they didn't really have a system um, for like someone running as president like we do today, and they have a running mate that would be vice president. Is pretty much whoever got the most votes was the president. Whoever got the second most were became vice president. But Jefferson and Burr received the same amount of votes. So then it went to the House of Representatives to try to figure out who would become president, and they had to revote 35 times, but eventually Jefferson won the election, which led to the 12th Amendment, which deals with having more modernized elections like we do now, with the system of the running mate and the vice president. Net. So the Federalists realized that um, the party in power was changing. Uh, so right before he left office, John Adams did a couple things. Um, he passed the Judiciary Act of 1801, which took away a Supreme Court justice, and then he also appointed midnight judges. So what he wanted to do was, since the president's political party was changing, he wanted another branch of the government to have um, the same political views as his party. So he appointed John Marshall as Chief Justice. Um, and then when Jefferson came into the office, he had Marbury as um, someone working with the justices, and so he saw on his desk that he had to appoint John Marshall as Chief Justice, and he's like, "Well, I'm definitely not going to do that because he doesn't have the same political party as me, so I'm just not going to give it to him." And then someone went up to John Marshall and they're like, "Hey, congrats on the Chief Justice gig," and John Marshall was like, "What are you talking about? Um, I wasn't appointed as Chief Justice." So there was this big issue, and it was the case Marbury versus Madison, and that led to the idea of judicial review, where the Supreme Court can look at laws to see if it's constitutional or not. So one of the biggest things that um, Thomas Jefferson did uh, was the Louisiana Purchase. Like we said earlier, that we needed goods to get to the Ohio River Valley, and we already had access to the Mississippi River, but we needed New Orleans because that was the main port that led into the Mississippi River. So we were prepared to offer $10 million just for New Orleans and West Florida. So we sent Monroe to go negotiate with the French. But just for $5 million, we got all of Louisiana, which is a crazy big deal because that pretty much doubled the land that we had. So then he sent some men, Lewis and Clark. You probably heard of them. They led an expedition to detail the territory. Um, and they were helped by the Mandan and Shoshone tribes. Some people you might have heard of is Sacagawea. She was a Native American who helped Lewis Clark, and a slave named York who also helped the expedition. So they pretty much just went through the territory and made maps and descriptions of what they saw, so the president would know what's out there. Um, but they actually weren't the first people to say what was out there, because there was an explorer named Zebulon Pike who published his expedition first, and he looked at the upper Mississippi Valley. So this was our country before the Louisiana Purchase of the original 13 colonies, and then the Ohio River Valley. But then we just wanted New Orleans, this part right here, and some of Western Florida. So we were offering $10 million for this. But for $15 million, we got all this. So, of course, even though it wasn't really authorized, Thomas Jefferson said yes, because that was an amazing deal because the French needed money for the war that they were currently fighting in. So the next slideshow will be talking about the War of 1812.